So now that we have our beam system in place, we have our columns, we're actually going to look at just changing the beam and column type. In the previous part of tutorials, we basically had the default, whatever the default beams and columns is what we used. But now we're going to go back and just change the type and put in our own specific beams and columns. So again, you can follow along the notes if you have them. So we'll start off with the columns. So we're going to look at a 3D view. So what we're going to do first of all is going to select everything on the screen. So again, you can just drag your mouse across, hold down the shift key, drag the mouse the whole way across this to select everything. And again, as before, we'll notice that all the grid lines and everything is selected. We don't want to do that. Again, we're going to use the filter option. So we'll just go up to the, once you've everything selected, the modify tab will come up here. So we're going to click on the filter icon up here. And then we're just going to select, we only want to select the columns. So again, we have lots of different ones here, but don't mind the analytical columns. We actually just want the normal columns. So untick everything except the structural columns and get rid of the framing because these are our beams. So then we'll just have structural columns, and I have 135. Hopefully you have the same. So we click OK. So now we can see when we go in here, it's only the columns are actually selected, which is actually a nice handy way to do it. It means you don't have to kind of go in and edit each one individually. So next thing we're going to do, we're going to change the properties, so, or change the type of column we have. So in the properties tab, we're going to click on edit type. So again, if your properties tab is on the right hand side of the screen, just underneath the top of it, you'll see this little button here called edit type. Again, this displays the properties for the family type which need to be selected. So we're going to click in here, and then this little icon, this window comes up. So on this screen, what we're going to do, we're actually going to load up a family. So hopefully you've access to families. If you don't, well, we'll worry about that afterwards. But if you're in the classroom, it means you don't have the structural columns loaded, just call me over. So first thing we're going to do is going to click on load. So we're going to load a family. Again, as we mentioned in the previous tutorials or earlier on in the previous tutorial, a family is basically a collection of objects. So in this case, we're going to load a column family. So that's going to bring us in a lot of different types of columns. So we're going to click on the little load button here. And again, if you have the families installed on your computer and the family libraries installed on your computer, you should get something looking like this. Because we're in Europe, we're going to be, when we kind of use the UK style columns, we're going to click into the folder UK. We're going to scroll down to structural columns. So open it up. And again, we have different options: concrete, steel, precast concrete, steel, and wood. For this example, we're going to look into the concrete folder again. And then we're going to click on the concrete rectangular. And again, these are coming in with a file extension of .rfa. Don't need to worry about them too much, but we just want to click on the concrete rectangular. So again, it gives you a little preview of what it's going to look like. Currently we have the steel columns, but we're going to change them all to these type of concrete rectangular. So once you have it, we're going to click on open. So that just loads it up. Now, before we do anything else, the next most important thing we're going to do, the default one that we used was the universal beam column. If we save this now, we don't want to overwrite the previous column that we used. So what we're going to do is duplicate it. So this is very, very important. So make sure you do, before you load onto the drawing, always make sure you duplicate it. And then we're just going to rename it. So just basically adding a new column to our library. So we're going to change this to 300 by 300 millimeter. Click OK. So now we've duplicated it. And then we're going to change the dimensions. So obviously B is 300, which is what we wanted. And we're just going to change the depth of it to 300. Mine has B is 300 and H is 300, but in this case we're just going to keep them both at 300, so 300. So this is the thickness and the depth, whatever you want. So the height will vary depending on actually how tall our levels are. We don't need to do anything else. I just check, make sure I'm not missing anything. No, this looks all good. Scroll down here. We can click on the little preview icon if you want to have a look at it. And you'll see it'll show up here on the side of the screen. So that's what we want. So now we have, this should be 300 here and 300 in this direction. So once you've got all that, we can just click apply and OK. and then you'll see we've actually loaded up. And then once your computer gets over the little hump, you can kind of hopefully see the columns will all change to their concrete columns. So here we are here. So now we see we still have the columns selected, but now we'll see that they're actually using the concrete rectangular columns. And if you zoom in, you'll see they've all changed to the concrete rectangular ones. So again, it's a nice way to do it. If you wanted to change all the columns in one go, select them all, select the whole model, use the filter button to just select the columns, go in, edit type, duplicate the column that we're using, and then just load up the family or the type of column that you want, and then it'll apply, and then that'll change them all instantly. So again, nice quick way to do it. You can actually edit lots of the model in one go. So again, very useful to know. So now once we've done our columns, we're going to go onto our beams. We're going to do something similar for the beams. Again, just going to hit escape a couple of times just to clear everything out. So nothing's selected. So we're going to do the same thing, but this time we're going to follow the same steps we're just going to do for the beams. So same thing again. So we're going to select the entire model. Again, this is good for practice. Again, this time we only want to do the beams, all the grid line beams, sorry, not the internal beam, the beams from the beam system, but the beams that are on the grid lines. We're going to do first of all, so we click on the filter icon, and in this case, the beams that are on the grid lines, these are the ones that we're going to call on the structural framing primary. So we're going to unclick all of these. So we should have these ones. Click apply and click OK. And if you zoom in, we'll see it's only the beams that are on the grid lines have been selected. So if these internal beams in the beam system are selected, you need to go back and redo that filter step, because obviously you might have clicked on the wrong one. And again, depending on what version of Revit you're using, it could be called a girder or a primary or secondary or a joist. So just make sure you know that for this one, we're looking at the girders or the primary structural framing. So we're going to do the same thing again. By default, we used the universal beams last time, but we're going to go back into edit type. We're going to change them to our own one. So I don't know why this window is so big. I'll just make it a bit smaller so we can see it better on my screen. Here we go. So again, like last time, very important, we're going to duplicate it. We don't want to write over this family, this universal beams, because we might need that again in the future. So we're just going to duplicate it. Actually, no, sorry. I'm skipping ahead of myself. Before we duplicate it, we have to actually load up the one we want. So going to go back in the library. So if we click on the load icon, it'll go back to our previous one where we were for the columns, but obviously we don't want columns. So let's go back to our UK folder, and we're going to go to structural framing. And then we're going to see here. So what do we want? Okay, so we're going to go for concrete again. So which one shall we use? Let me just double check my notes. Yeah, so we'll do the exact same as last time. We'll use concrete rectangular beams. So click on this one. You should get a little preview there. We're going to open it up. And once it's loaded, you'll see it showing up here on screen. So we want to change the dimensions again, but remember, before we do anything, we don't want to edit this one because this might be used again in the future. So we're going to use our own custom one. So we're going to duplicate this. We're going to change this to, we're going to rename it. So this time we're going to call it 300 by 500 millimeters. Click OK. So now we've actually changed the dimensions on the name of it, sorry. We're going to actually have to change the dimensions. So we have the 300 here, which is going to be this case, and we're going to change the 500. So just type in 500 where it was 600. Let's click out. And again, we're just going to click oh, before we do that. No, we've done the duplicate, sorry. Just double checking myself, and I think we're good. So if we click then, so we'll see that's now the 500, and this is now the 300. And again, that's turning off the preview. You can turn it on and off if you like. So anyway, we'll click apply, and we click. You'll see when we click the apply, the actual preview diagram changes to the correct dimensions, and then we'll click OK. And then hopefully, once your computer gets going, it'll all change. And then we see after a few seconds, if your computer's fast or slow, hopefully it changed. But if you zoom in, you'll see all the primary framing, which was the beams along the grid lines. They've all changed to their concrete rectangular beam, 300 by 500 millimeters. So again, double check, make sure everything is changed correctly, that none of the internal beam system has changed, because we only want to do the external ones. So hopefully yours looks like this. So the next thing we're going to do, if you can follow the notes, we're going to just do a little bit of changing here and there. We've done all the beams on the grid lines, but what you want to do next is we're going to change the perimeter beams. So we'll see these beams along the outside on each level. We're going to change them just to make them a little bit different size compared to the other ones. Compared to the internal grid line beams, we're going to just change the perimeter ones. We're going to change the perimeter ones to 300 by 350 deep. So probably the easiest way to do this is actually just go to each level and select them. So we're going to go to so obviously this is our ground floor, so we're going to go to the first floor. So we go to our floor plans and click here. Again, if your computer is going slow, you can always change our 3D. We can give it that in a second, but I'll leave mine for the moment. Okay, so let's escape out of this a couple of times. So again, just for practice, we'll select everything again. Click on our filter. Again, we don't want to change all these other things. So unselect grids, model groups. We don't want to do beam systems. We don't want to do columns. We don't want to do the tags or the other stuff. Again, if you're not too sure what you're selecting, what you're not selecting, what you can do is you can move the filter dialog box to the side. And again, we want to select just the external beams. Obviously, we can't select them individually, but what we can do is kind of reduce the amount of beams we are selecting. So let's say we want to select primary. We can click that and apply. And again, give it a second or two, and you'll see that it's only the primary beams are selected, which is kind of what we want. But again, we actually only want the external ones here. So that's not really going to work. And sorry, just for demonstration purposes, if you wanted to select the beam system ones, you can just tick on the structural framing secondary, and you'll see what will happen here. That's what these are, selecting the internal beam system ones. But again, we actually just want to try and select the primary ones, but the problem now is that it's selecting all of the primary ones, so including these ones, but we only want to change the perimeter ones. So unfortunately in this case, we're probably going to have to just go around the slow way to do it. Just going to select them individually, but it'll only take a few minutes. So in this case, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to cancel out of this. So it's the filter button in this case isn't going to work. So we'll just press escape a couple of times. And then you can zoom in, just make sure we're doing good. We're doing the correct one. So again, holding down your control button on the keyboard, this allows us to do multiple selection. And just hover over each of the beams. Again, you can see in mine that it's not showing up. That's just because my computer is probably struggling with rendering the graphics on Revit, but again, if you hover the mouse over them, they should be there. So just keep your finger on the control. Now, if you're moving, if you need to pan, you can take your finger off the control button and push down on the mouse wheel, and that can pan it around and it won't deselect them. Just make sure when you go back to selecting the beams that you keep your finger on the control. If you select one of the beams without pressing the control, I've actually selected a grid there for a second. So you can just, if you click on something you don't want, you can just unclick it. So, tricky when in the grid, so press control here. You'll see when the right one's being selected, when it goes blue. Just keep going around. We're just going around and getting all the perimeter beams. Again, just be careful you don't select the grid lines by accident. Just move the mouse into position when you see the beam being highlighted in a blue outline. Okay. so if I zoom out, now I notice from looking at that, I can see that actually I've accidentally selected the grid. So in this case, I can use a filter, and I'll just get rid of that. That's probably the model group, is it? There we go. So we can click OK. So now we only have the external beams selected. So again, what we're going to do next is just change these beams. So we're going to go into edit type. We're going to duplicate the previous beam. We're going to put in a concrete beam. We're just going to change the size of it. So this one, still going to be 300, but it's going to be 350 millimeters deep. So click OK. Then we change this to 350. Hit enter. Again, the preview isn't. So if the apply button doesn't show up, you can just double click the preview to turn it on and off, and then let's just reset it. We can apply it, and you'll see the shape if it changes. That's roughly the size. But that's not roughly. It is exactly the size we want. So we can. So we've duplicated it, and we're okay. We're good. So we can click OK here, and then that'll actually turn all the beams you've selected into a 300 by 350 millimeter beam. The next little change we're going to do on this floor, I'll just hit escape a couple of times here. The engineers asked us to change the beams along grid 3 to 300 by 350. Currently, remember, all the internal beams were the 300 by 500, but we actually want the ones on grid line 3, which is across here. I'm going to change all of these to 300 by 350. So again, you can just zoom in, and we're going to press Control and just select all the beams along grid line 3. Oh, I've accidentally selected the grid line there, so you can press this. I think it's just getting a bit tricky because my computer doesn't like the processing power that Revit is demanding of it. Must ask work for a new laptop. Okay, here we go. So now we've got our beams along grid line B. So just give a few seconds to catch up in itself. Okay, so if it's not coming up here, it's multiple categories selected. That means I must have selected something else by accident. So we can go up to the filter option here, and again, we can get rid of the beam systems. I must have clicked on one of the beam systems by accident, so I'll just deselect that, hit apply, and OK. So, okay, so a bit slow, but it came through. So we'll see so this is what we said earlier on. So these internal beams are all the 300 by 500, but what we want to do now is change them to the 300 by 350. Unlike in previous exercise or in the previous example where we had to kind of go in and duplicate it, because we've already actually have the 300 by 350 beam. Or do we actually have the 300 by 350 beam? So we'll drop down. So these are the ones we've created. Okay, here are the ones so we've already created a 300 by 350. So with all these beams along grid line 3 selected, we'll just click on the little drop down menu in the properties tab. We'll select a 300 by 350, and just give that a second, and that'll actually change all these beams to 300 by 350, which we can see here now. So once they're selected, and you'll see what's coming up here, this is what we have. So that's how we've done it. So in this case, we've actually went around, we've changed all the perimeter beams to, what did we change them to? We changed all the perimeter beams to 300 by, what did we do? So I'm just checking my notes. Perimeter beams have all been changed to 300 by 350. Obviously it says it there. The internal beams are all now concrete rectangular, and they are all 300 by 500. And then the beams along grid line 3 are now 300 by 350. So that's we've done the first floor. Now we're going to have to just double check before we go on to check everything else on the different levels. We're going to go to each level and do the same thing again. But if you kind of zoom in at the level on the 3D view, you can kind of see, just looking at this, definitely the ones on the first floor are definitely smaller than the ones in the second and the roof level. So everything we've changed is good, and you can see them here. This is a bit smaller than this one, so our changes have actually worked. Now what we have to do is basically repeat that process for for the next floors up, so the second floor and the roof level. So again, in this case, you're going to have to open the second floor. Just double click on the floor plan for second floor. And again, you're going to have to repeat the same process, all the same process again for this. I'm not going to do it here exactly again. If you want to, I'm going to pause. You can pause the video and spend the next 10 to 15 minutes just changing everything again like we did last time. If you're not sure how you did it, just reverse back to where we did it on the first floor and you can follow along again. Or you can try and have a go doing it yourself. But again, check your notes. We want to change all the, first of all, we're going to change all the beams. So bar the beam systems. So the structures are your girders or your primary beams is what they're called. We're going to change all of those to 300 by 500 mil deep. And then we are going to change all the perimeter beams. They're going to become 300 by 350. And then all the beams along grid line 3 are going to become 300 by 350. So again, we don't have to do the duplicating this time because we've actually already loaded up the beams, duplicated them and changed them in. So now all you have to do is actually using the filter icon, just go around selecting everything, filter the ones you want. And then once they're all selected, you can just double check the filter, make sure you haven't selected any grid lines or anything else. Then you just, once they're selected, just go to the properties tab and then just click down and change to the one you want. Straightforward enough. Again, if you're not too sure, just go back and watch the last few minutes when we did it on the first floor, but we're going to do the same process for the roof and second floor. So pause the video now and work on that for the next 10 to 15 minutes. And once you've got that done, then you can come on and we'll move on to the next part where we're going to actually do some structural walls. Okay, so hopefully now you've changed everything. So I've actually gone and done the first, second and the roof level. Again, we can go back to the 3D view. And if you look at all these, we can see that they're all the same. So our external are all 300 by 350 on each floor. The internal ones are 300 by 500 and our beam systems are still the same as they were. So again, hopefully that does have a quick look on your 3D model, just spin it around, just make sure everything's the same. But hopefully that selection went okay. Again, if anything didn't work, just go back and watch the example of how we did the first floor. And that might help. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do, we're going to move on to the next part of the tutorial, which is going to be the structural walls. So again, before moving on to the next video about the structural walls, then we're going to move on to the foundations afterwards. Just double check that everything is correct. And okay, we'll see you in the next video.